Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 5. This is part 1 of Chapter 5, so we'll do about the first 29 slides and we'll do it in another part. So in this part, we're going to focus, of course, on the integumentary system. We'll look a lot at the cutaneous membrane, mostly in this one. Look at some accessory structures in the next one, but this will be a lot of the cutaneous membrane. I chose the quote, "Failure is not fatal, but failure to change might be." All right. So this will be the things that we'll cover for this particular chapter. So these are the list of things we'll be discussing. So I want to get started off just a few things about why we, integument, what it is, what it does, things like that. A few of the things that I like to talk about, like number one, one of the reasons why we do some of the things we do in healthcare, like that they have you strip down to your underwear, they have you wear a gown, things that expose your skin, is the skin is the most accessible system in the body, so we can see a lot of things. It shows up a lot of signs and symptoms show up in the integument, so things like that. It's very useful, very important to look at. It's your first line of defense. It's really important things like abrasion, microorganisms, and chemicals that might attack you. It's got a two-part layered. It's got a cutaneous membrane and accessory structures. The cutaneous membrane, that's the very superficial part. So it's got the superficial epidermis and the deeper dermis, but more superficial is the epidermis, and then the dermis is the deeper part. The cutaneous membrane is the part of mostly of the skin, except for the accessory structures that make up skin as well, and that's hair, nails, and glands. This has deep to this is a hypodermis, a subcutaneous layer. That's where adipose and blood vessels are. It's not part of the integument, but it is a. I always kind of think of it. It's not part of the integument, but it is associated to the integument. This is where hypodermic injections are there, and while we do that, that helps basically preserve any underlying organs from the damage of the needle. So as you can see, the integumentary system is composed of, first off, it has some functions that we talked about. I'll talk more about what it does in a minute. But it's made up of your cutaneous membrane and accessory structures. Cutaneous membrane is made of your epidermis and dermis, and then the accessory structures are hair, nails, and glands. Okay, so that is a image of human skin. So this is what human skin, the hypodermis, you can see subcutaneous layer, or hypodermis, the fat and blood vessel area underneath all that. So what does it do? Well, there's a few things it does. One of the things it's going to do is help provide protection for the underlying tissues. It's going to excrete salts and waste. It's going to maintain body temperature by either insulation or sweating, so that fat can insulate us and the sweat can sweat to lose heat. We can lose body heat by sweating. We produce melanin that helps protect from UV radiation. We can make keratin that's going to protect against abrasion and repel water. We're going to synthesize vitamin D3. This is going to be turned into calcitriol, and this is going to absorb calcium. We're going to store lipids. We're going to be able to detect touch, and we're going to build coordinated immune response for pathogens, and even some cases superficial skin cancers we'll talk about a little bit later. The epidermis is made up of stratified squamous epithelium. It gets all of its nutrients from capillaries that are found in the dermis. The superficial most cells are dead, and they are packed full of a protein named keratin. And once we pack these cells full of keratin, we call these cells keratinocytes. And the keratinocytes form layers, these layers of cells that are called strata. Stratified, remember, stratified squamous. Okay, so strata. So they form the strata. We'll talk about strata in just a minute. Now, there are thin skin and thick skin. Thin skin only has 4 layers, 4 strata. It's most of the body surface. Thick skin has 5 strata, and it covers the palms and the soles of the feet and all that. Okay, palms of the hands, soles of the feet. To get thick skin, just remember, let's get sunburned. Okay, corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, basal. Okay, let's get sunburned. So these are the layers. Let's get sunburned. Okay, corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basal. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about what they have going on. Okay, now we'll start with the basal layer, the germativum. Okay, the germativum. And the germativum, or basal, is the deepest layer. It's attached to the basement membrane. It's done so by hemidesosomes. It's normally just one cell thick. The basal lamina separates from the other connective tissues. One of the things you're going to find here is epidermal ridges, and these ridges are going to increase surface area to contact between the basement membrane and stuff to increasing attachment and strength, lower connective tissues. So it's going to extend up into to the dermis. So you're going to have like a wave. We'll see these epidermal ridges later as we talk more about the skin. We'll talk about the papillary layer and the papilla, things like that. Papilla means nipple, so it's nipple-like extensions. The basal cells are cells that are found here. These are the stem cells. They divide to replace the epithelium. There are Merkel cells. They unite with them to make tactile discs, unite with any sensory nerve, so make a tactile disc. And there's melanocytes. And the melanocytes, what they're going to do is they're going to make melanin. Okay, melanin, ratio to melanin. Melanin is the pigment that is packed into vesicles. The ratio to melanocytes to stem cells is variable in the location of the body. You may notice some parts of the body are darker than others and things like that. If you are more fair-skinned, you have melanocytes only in the stratum basale and spinosum. If you're dark-skinned, you have them in the stratum basale, spinosum, and granulosum. So you have 3 layers there. Melanomas, this is where malignant melanoma comes out, and the basal cells, the basal cell carcinoma. So you have 2 kinds of cancers that can come from here, melanoma or carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma. So here we have the cells of the stratum basale. We have the Merkel cells with the tactile discs. We have the melanocyte, and then there are basal cells as well that are found here as well. Stratum basale, they're hemidesosomes that attach it. Now, we talked about the dermis interlocks with the stratum basale. They interlock, forming this pattern like this, these papilla. Papilla means nipple, these nipple-like projections. Dermis and the stratum basale interlock, and they have these folds to increase surface area for attachment. On them, there's epidermal ridges, and these are actually determined by your genes, and this is what generates your fingerprints. The dermal papilla, they're on the dermis, and they are these ridges here on the dermis. Okay. Now, there is a spinosum. Now, it is 8 to 10 layers of keratinized cells. They're held together with desmosomes. There's 8. We call this the spiny layer because the cells look spiny. It's the division of these cells, there's 2 daughter cells. They push up from the basal to stratum spinosum. What there might be here is cells called dendritic cells, sometimes called Langerhans cells, and they participate in immunity. Langerhans cells, they're defense against microorganisms that penetrate the dermis or superficial skin cancers. So again, know what these cells do, know what layer has the cells. For example, back here, I might ask you guys, which layer has this cell? Which layer contains this cell? Okay, on a test. The granulosum, called the granny layer, is 3 to 5 layers of keratinocytes. When they get here, they dehydrate, they die, they get packed full of keratin, which is what makes your hair and nails. There's a lucidum. They get so thick with keratin, it gets clear. Clear layer, lucid, you're clear. They found only in thick skin. This is in the palms of the hands, soles of the feet, only in thick skin. They're thin, flat, and so densely filled with keratin and lack organelles that it looks clear when we stain it. Then there's the corneum. This is the layer that covers both thick and thin skin. This is the outermost layer. It is called the horn layer because keratin also makes horns. It's the most superficial. It ranges between 15 to 30 layers of dead keratinocytes, and keratinization, that's the process of adding more keratin to the stratum corneum. So when we form, keratinization happens when we get calluses and corns and things like that. It could take 15 to 30 days, somewhere between half a month to a month, to go from the basal to the stratum corneum. And they may stay there 2 more weeks until they finally shed. And why that is desmosomes keep them attached and resist that shedding. I always like to tell my students when I teach the cell junctions in one of my classes that I teach, I tell them, hey, if you go to the beach and you roll around in the sand, swim in the salt water, and then get a sunburn, your skin comes off in sheets. It peels off. That these cell junctions are so good that they even keep the skin together when it's that damaged and been sunburned and peeled off. Okay, it still holds together. Okay. Okay. Now, the cutaneous plexus is dermal blood supply. The deep network is called cutaneous plexus. It is the deeper blood vessels right here. They are running along the reticular layer. Subpapillary plexus, right here. The subpapillary plexus, these are going to be underneath the they're going to be in the subcutaneous layer, associated nearby subcutaneous layer, closer to subcutaneous. They lead to it, but they are capillaries that are closer to the top. They lead to blood vessels in the subcutaneous layer, but they are found up here. A contusion is a bruise, and they caused by damage of blood vessels in the dermis. Now, there are two ways that you can sweat. That's insensible and sensible perspiration. Insensible perspiration is water loss by evaporation. That is, you don't feel it. The skin is resistant to water loss, but is not waterproof, and you can lose about a pint of water every day through your skin. Sensible perspiration, called sweat, which by sweat glands, we feel it. Body is cooled off by breaking hydrogen bonds of water. We also remove salts and drugs. We can protect against bacteria. Sweat contains something called dermacidin that helps us to prevent bacterial growth, and sometimes a salt, things like that as well. So this is why sweat tastes salty. Okay. Now, how do we get our skin color? Well, there are three major skin color. Two of them, one has to do with blood, and then the other two are in the skin. There's keratin, which is the orange-yellow pigment in the epidermis. It can get turned into vitamin A, which can be used for vision or used in epithelial growth. It accumulates in light-skinned people. This is why some of us look more peachy colored. And then there's melanin, the brown-yellow to black pigment produced by melanocytes in the stratum-based cell. It's made by an amino acid tyrosine. If you lack an enzyme called tyronase, you can't convert tyrosine to melanin. We call these people albinos. We have albinism. This causes albinism. Then there's UV radiation that can be protected. Melanin protects against UV radiation that damages DNA. What happens is when two thymines are side by side on a DNA strand, they will bind to each other side by side instead of binding to their base pair on the other side of the strand. And this will cause base pair issues, mutations. This is how UV radiation, thymine dimers. Melanin depends a little bit to increase UV exposure. That's why you get a suntan if you go out and lay in the sun. Hemoglobin is a protein in blood that transports oxygen. It looks very red when bound to oxygen. Bright red means more oxygen. Darker red means less oxygen. Hemoglobin gets attached to carbon dioxide. It turns blue in the skin. The skin color turns blue, called cyanosis. And when blood supply is decreased, the skin turns a pale color. Okay. One of the things we have is for D3, a vitamin that we need to talk about. This is the sunshine vitamin. It can be produced by sunlight or UV radiation, where we take steroid, turn it into cholecalciferol. It enters the bloodstream. Cholecalciferol is converted into an intermediate by the liver, then gets converted into calcitriol. Calcitriol by the kidneys. Calcitriol increases calcium and phosphate ion absorption and for the digestive tract, so that you can use it to build bone, make stronger bone. We can also get cholecalciferol, vitamin D3, from our diet. This goes to the liver, and then kidneys be made in calcitriol if we digest it. We can make it by our skin, or we can get it dietarily. We add D3 to milk to get that because D3 deficiency is one of the most common vitamin deficiencies. There's skin cancers. There's basal cell carcinoma and malignant melanoma. A basal cell carcinoma is a malignant type of cancer in the stratum base cell caused by UV radiation, those thymine dimers. And then there's a malignant melanoma. They are caused by a malignant melanocyte. They can metastasize in the lymphatic system. Very important that you catch it early, catch it early, catch it early, catch it early. If you catch it early, you have 99% of surviving 5 years. If it's been detected after it's metastasized, you have less than a 14% chance. That's just a chance, not change, of surviving 5 years. There's a couple little typos here and there that I need to fix. So what's going to happen, guys, is, well, I like to cover the ABCD rule. We want to look for A, asymmetry, B, border irregularity, C, color, and D, diameter. If it's asymmetrical, the two sides of the pigment spot don't match, then that could be a malignant melanoma. If the border is irregular, borders of the lesion are not smooth but exhibit indentations, then it could be a malignant melanoma. If the pigmented spot contains several colors, this could be a malignant melanoma. If the diameter is bigger than 6 millimeters in diameter, this could be a malignant melanoma. Okay. The dermis. The dermis is between the epidermis and the hypodermis. It is made up of collagen fibers. We call them white fibers. And elastic fibers. We call them yellow fibers. Collagen is very strong but flexible, but elastic fibers stretch and recoil. This gives elasticity to the skin. The dermis has two layers. There's a papillary layer and a reticular layer. The papillary layer is the more superficial with the areolar tissue, as capillaries, lymph vessels, and other sensory neurons. And the most important sensory cell here will be the tactile corpuscle. Reticular layer, which is the deeper layer, mostly data density regular connective tissues, holds accessory structures, the roots of the hairs, the nails, and the glands. The most important sensory cell here is called a lamellated corpuscle. And here we can actually see the collagen and elastic fibers found in the dermis coming together. This is a reticular layer of dermis with collagen fibers and elastic fibers intermixed with each other. The dermal blood supply, which we already talked about already, so I do apologize for having this slide in here a second time. I think I had it in here twice by mistake. I was going to move it to somewhere else, and I put it where the new book put it and forgot to delete the old slide. We're going to innervate the skin. Integument is filled with nerve endings. If it comes in contact with skin, it can initiate a nerve impulse that can reach our brain. These nerve fibers, they control blood flow, they can adjust gland secretion, and they can act as sensory receptors. These are all things that nerves do. They don't just feel, they also control things like blood flow in the skin, secretion rates of glands like sweating, and they also monitor the sensory receptors and feel. Okay, they make things. Now, the receptors of the skin, these are some things I definitely will be testing on. They're free nerve endings. They are very unspecialized. They detect usually pain. There's tactile discs. We'll see they also do some touch. They monitor the Merkel cells. The Merkel cells detect pain and touch. They combine with the tactile discs. The tactile corpuscles, they do light touch, what we call fine touch. Some people call this two-point touch. There's the reticular layer, the lamellated corpuscle, sometimes called Pacinian corpuscle. They do deep touch and pressure. Ruffini corpuscles are responsible for sensation of stretching of your skin. And root hair plexus, any distortions of body hairs. You pull a hair, you move a hair gets moved by a bug. Root hair plexus is to detect that. And here you can see free nerve endings, root hair plexus, Merkel cells with a tactile disc, tactile corpuscle, lamellated corpuscle, and Ruffini corpuscle. Now, I do want to talk about the blood supply, and then basically I'm going to stop right there, okay? If you get your blood supply gets interrupted with bed sores, you'll get what is called a bed sore, decubitus ulcer. Interrupted to the epidermis, you can get an ulcer, shedding of the epithelium. Bed sores, they are bedridden people. They kill the epithelial cell that removes the barrier. Infections can get in. The nerve cells, the Merkel cells are here, so bed sores can create an intense pain to the CNS. So they can be very painful. They hurt. Uncomfortable. They set up sepsis. So you got to watch early stage bed sores and a late stage where they open up. Late stage bed sores. Okay, compression ulcers. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about is your subcutaneous layer. The hypodermis lies deep to the dermis, connected by the reticular layer by a connective tissue. It stabilizes the position of skin. It's mostly adipose tissue. There are larger arteries and veins here. They are now, one of the cool things about this is your subcutaneous fat can be determined by sex hormones. So like males get more on their bellies, things like that. Women might get more on their breasts and hips. So there is a sexual dependency to subcutaneous fat deposition. All right, so we're going to stop here for the first lecture, kind of shorter ones. My students like the shorter lectures usually for an online class, and they can listen to them multiple times, and they're easier to focus on. So I try to keep them shorter instead of going in long lectures. Okay, this concludes my video. Thank you.